Well, we are on question number 2. If you've got your outline there, question number 2 of Answers to Life's Difficult Questions. And this is based on a series from Rick Warren. We acknowledge the background material for these messages. But as I said, when I was looking at developing some material which would perhaps help people in the lockdown, you know, the number of people who have had mental illness problems and all sorts of struggles in the lockdown, it's incredible. And we need to address those problems as churches. And so what we're doing in this series is looking at some of the difficult questions people ask and finding out what the Bible might say about that by using some stories out of the Bible which are fairly easy to follow but are full of principles. This particular, some background here. Peter had been out with his friends all night fishing, but had caught nothing. That's why I don't bother going fishing. And Peter and his friends have been out fishing, caught nothing. Probably unusual because this man, Peter, is a professional fisherman. He was not a novice. He probably had the best nets and a good boat. He knew exactly where the fish could be caught. He'd worked all night as his income depended on a good catch, but Peter came up short. He caught nothing, which was a bit of an embarrassment. And I want to say to you, even the superstars often are caught out with falling short of what they'd aimed for. And this is really a powerful story into all of our lives, because I don't think, let me ask you, how many people here from time to time have come up short of what they'd hoped they'd achieve? Everyone. You know, and if I could put 2 feet in the air and 2 hands in the air at the same time without falling off the stage, I'd say exactly that. Well, next day, the disciples were washing their nets on the seashore. They felt tired, they felt discouraged, and at that moment Jesus came along and requested to use Peter's boat. He wanted to use it as a speaking platform because there is a crowd around and he wanted to share with them. And of course, if you stand on the seashore, it's not going to be that easy for a crowd to gather around, but he jumped in the boat, went out a little bit deeper and started speaking to the crowd. And after he had finished speaking, he says to his disciples, "Let's go fishing." And you think, that's the last thing they wanted to hear. They'd come up with nothing. And he says, let's go fishing. Go out into the deep. Throw down your nets. Now, of course, he didn't say they'd catch anything. He was just telling them what he wanted them to do. So Peter tells Jesus of the failed fishing expedition that he had last night, but then he is willing to do what Jesus says. Now that's the background to the story. We'll read that in the passage. But what does this story teach us about failure? You know, you need to understand in the Bible, Jesus performed miracles, but they were always performed as a lesson to people. The principles would be contained in that miracle. And this incident teaches us what to do when our best is not good enough, when we fall short. Now, for myself, I've had times of falling short in study. Now, whilst I got a number of degrees and other things, the issue was when I was at school, and it was in year 11, the teacher said to me, "Hey, listen, I think it's time for you to leave and go and get a job." Now, at that particular stage, I was not interested in school. I spent a lot of time on the golf course with my mates, playing truant, enjoying ourselves. There were times when we mucked around a lot, and it was one of those things where I was part of the crowd. But at the end of year 11, going into year 12, which is a university sort of entrance year, the teacher said to me, "You're a dead loss. Leave. Go and get a job." Well, I decided that my poor performance wasn't good enough, so I then strove to work hard at at the situation of study for the future. Now, I did a lot of athletics and sport. The next year, whilst I was in year 12, I had to end up repeating the year because in the high jump that I was in, I ended up damaging my knee. No ACL left in there. There's no cartilage left in there. The knee's pretty wrecked. And I was told by the doctor, because I had this view of going into doing sports science and being a phys ed teacher. And my knee was totally wrecked. And they performed an operation, but at that stage they couldn't sort out the ACL, they couldn't sort out any of that stuff. That was before. These days you go in and they get, microsurgery or whatever it is, and they a couple of little cuts, and about 3 days later you can limp around, but you're basically picked up again. So that wasn't a good situation. So I decided to change some subjects and went and did science, and the next year got through, went through university, did my degree in science, then in education, then in management, and a whole lot of other things. But the issue was my best in study wasn't good enough in year 11. And it wasn't that much better in year 12 when I came through the operation and all the rest of the stuff. Then in relationships, you look at it and you say, well, in relationships you can fail. And even at my age, teaching about counselling skills and relationships, I came home one day and been a busy day, very few margins in my life. I'm sitting down having a drink. My wife is making a coffee for herself. And she started talking about a particular issue. And I thought that I'd listened, because I teach listening skills and I've got to work on those all the time in counselling. But within 5 minutes, we had an argument. It's unreal. We started, and this was just when both of us wanted to sit down and see how the day had gone. And I had to stop and say, after 5 minutes, I said, I want to apologise. I didn't really hear what you said. I heard the words, but didn't get the message. Can you start again? Well, within a few minutes, we're on the same page. We weren't disputing a particular issue. And what I'd failed to do is to come up to the mark even on the things that I know that I've got skills in. And we can all fail. You can do that in marriage, you can do it in the workplace. Life can be really tough when things don't work out, and the tendency is for us to give up, to hide, to say, everything's okay. But underneath we're screaming out, this is hopeless. Can anything make a difference? We virtually give up within ourselves, and then we've got to look at it, because if we give up on any issue in life, what happens is that haunts us as we go ahead, because we then have a bit of a fear of entering into the more difficult things of life that might be demanded. So this is an interesting story, and there are a number of principles that come out. But it's really a story about 2 fishing trips. And the first fishing trip wasn't that successful. The disciples had worked all night at their trade, which they knew so well, but they caught nothing. That's the first trip. Second trip, the disciples, under Jesus' instructions, work for only a short period of time, gain a catch that exceeded their expectations. In fact, it says in there was the largest catch they'd ever had. So we've got 2 fishing trips, one without Jesus, the other one with him. And we look at the fishing trips, same lake, same boat, same nets, the same people fishing. What made the difference? Well, the difference was Jesus in the boat, or Jesus directing the boat. And you look at this and you think, well, there's a number of differences that I'll outline, and they provide for us principles when our best attempts fall short of what's needed. But I want to say to you that application of these principles will lead to a different life for yourself, where you can reap the benefit of a spiritual life where you understand Jesus is in charge, speak to him, let him direct, and so on. And we'll flesh these principles out. Now, I'm not going to read the passage straight out, because I'm going to take each portion of the passage and then just read the section. But you've got the full story there. So let's get into these keys to success in life. Principle number 1, allow Jesus to be present in your life and to enter your situation. I'll read that again. Allow Jesus to be present in your life and enter into your situation. Let me read the verses 1 to 3. One day, as Jesus was standing by the lake in Gennesaret, the people were crowding around him, listening to the word of God. He saw at the water's edge 2 boats left there by the fishermen who were washing their nets. He got into one of the boats, one belonging to Simon, and asked him to pull out a little from the shore. Then he sat down and taught the people from the boat. Jesus' presence in our life situations makes all the difference. In the first fishing expedition mentioned in the text, the disciples were alone. In the second, Jesus was with them, and the disciples' successful fishing expedition was when they allowed Jesus into their situation. Nothing has greater influence on our personal success than whether we're living with Jesus in our lives or not. In Peter's case, his boat was his livelihood. As a fisherman, your boat is your business. And Peter made his boat available to Jesus to use. Christ used Peter's boat as a platform for ministry. Now, this is a very subtle and it's a very important principle. The question we ask here, does Jesus have access to your life? Because your life is your boat. All aspects of your life form the boat of life that you're sailing in. And as Peter had to hand over his boat to Jesus, we need to hand over our lives to him. And this is the first principle. And so often we petition our lives, even as Christians. When we're doing ministry work, we pray, we seek God's wisdom and so on, and then we take off our spiritual hat, we go home, and everything else in our lives is run according to what we want. Isn't that true? That's how most people operate. They've done an exercise in psychology that says splitting. They've split their lives into compartments where they can behave differently here than over here. And we're all guilty of that from time to time. And when it comes to church-based ministry, we like to think that Jesus is in charge. We seek his wisdom. We try to do what we're supposed to do. When it comes to life in general, we often go it alone. But if we give Jesus all aspects of our life and make every part available to him, Jesus can use our boat to minister to others. Now, this is important to understand. He will bless us and cause our lives to be a success for his kingdom advancement when he is in the boat, when he is in our lives. So many Christians can testify to this truth. And there's something about having Jesus in our boat that eliminates the fear and failure and reduces our concerns about results. And when Peter made Jesus his fishing partner, the result was an incredible catch that was of abundance. And let me share with you an example in my own life. I'd had 15 years with the education department in Victoria as a teacher. I'd risen up to a senior position in a large country high school. And God's call came on my life through a number of circumstances. And I decided to leave teaching and go into ministry with Campus Crusade for Christ. And the area was Life Ministries, which was a consulting ministry to churches. And I'd finished postgraduate work after my first 2 degrees and in administration and so on. And when I combined all that together, then I had something to offer to churches. Well, I left the country town that I was in. It was like the call of Abraham, you know. I sold up my house and everything else, and we moved with our kids down to Melbourne. And we didn't have too much money. I'd built my first house myself, and that's where I got some money to start off again. So we got this little house in Melbourne, and it was only very small, not like the one we left out in the country. And we settled in there. And I started ministry, but I was supposed to have with Campus Crusade support raised in a faith ministry with 3 months in arrears. In other words, if support failed, I'd at least have 3 months to go out and raise some more. Well, I never was able to raise the support, but I decided it was time to leave anyway. We'd seen God's blessing. It was a time when we sold our country house. Nothing was selling. Interest rates on home loans was 15%. In 1 week, all the price of materials, like at the moment, price of materials doubled. We just got our timber in time, and then suddenly it shot up beyond what we could ever afford. So we'd been through the miraculous things of praying. When we're in New Zealand having a break on long service leave, we prayed and we felt God saying, well, you just go. Step out in faith and go. But as soon as we agreed to do that, we had 3 cash buyers at a time when nothing was selling. God was working in amazing ways. Even the little house we got in Melbourne. But it was interesting, when I got to Melbourne, had no money coming in, and I felt my job as a husband was to make sure my family was supported. So every Saturday, I would go through the Age newspaper, looking up the classified ads for jobs. I saw a job in there which was really interesting because it was only for 2 days a week at a large school, a teacher and background and so on, but setting up a careers education department in the school. Now, I thought, golly, that's interesting because I was one of 12 people chosen to set that up for the state of Victoria. And we had set all that up, so I was probably one of the most knowledgeable people about the whole deal. So I go in for the interview, and I thought, man, this is going to be easy. Because only a couple of days a week, I can set the whole thing up and then leave them with something that will last. Get the message back, no, you haven't got the job. And I'm thinking, is this one of these ones where they already had someone selected, but they had to actually advertise to satisfy requirements? And I thought, this is unreal. They could get all the experience and the knowledge, the background, the connections, and I would get some money in to support my family. Then it was no. And I thought, I'll fail. I haven't got the support. I haven't got the money coming in. Where do we go? And in my prayer time, I finally came to the point almost where Peter was at. God, I've failed to be able to raise the money for me to be able to survive in ministry. I said, here's the deal, God, and I'm not sure whether you can do deals with God or not, but anyway, I was cheeky enough to do it. I said, here's the deal. I'll get on to the ministry that you've called me to, but you'd better look after the money. I want to tell you, 10 years later, in a faith ministry, we had been provided with everything we needed. Not what we wanted, but everything that we needed. We'd find a white goods would break down, a washing machine or something, and by the end of a week there would be one on the doorstep that we didn't even know where it came from. We lived like that for 10 years. That was awesome. And we found that when we let God take over our lives, then there was the opportunity for God to do major things in our life and bless us. We were no longer going to live for ourselves, but for Him. We're no longer going to say, I'll make sure I've set it all up. No, God, you're going to have to set up. Give us advice as to what we're to do. So the first principle here is based on Matthew 6:33. But seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, and all other things will be added to you. And if they don't come the way we want them, then He's teaching us something to grow us more into the likeness of Jesus. Man, what a principle. And it's the first principle that's in this message, in this simple little passage. If we give our whole life to Jesus, put Him first in our lives, He promises His overwhelming blessing. But it's not like a Father Christmas, because He's working on us, and at times He'll allow us to have some struggles because we've got to grow. Right, second principle, listen to God's plan, cooperate with God's plan. If we go to verse 4, when He had finished speaking, He said to Simon, put out into the deep water and let down your nets for a catch. Now this is counterintuitive. It's almost like we've been out fishing all night, we're professional fishermen, we know when the fish bite, it's at night time, it's not in the middle of the day. And so we get this fishing expedition, but it's in obedience now to Jesus' plan. So we need not only to appropriate His presence in our lives, but we also need to cooperate with His promptings in our life. And in this particular case, Jesus tells the disciples how and when to fish. And when Jesus is guiding us in our lives, we cannot fail because he doesn't sponsor failures. He's God. And I love Peter's reaction because this is a reaction that I'm learning after many years in ministry. But it's a lifetime job. He didn't argue. He didn't stop and say, Jesus, I'm the professional fisherman here. What experience have you had? You're more of a carpenter. He basically accepted. He didn't hesitate. He responded immediately. He didn't tell Jesus that the timing was wrong, that fishing is best at night. He didn't listen to his feelings, which is so often what people do. Oh, I feel this, and this is the right thing to do. No, he listened to Jesus' promptings. He tested it out. And Jesus said to Peter, launch into the deep. Why? Because the shallow water is where you get the minnows. The deep water is where you get the big fish. And it's a no-brainer that that's where he had to go out to. But what's the lesson for us? Too many people live their lives in the shallow water. They live in the safety zone. They don't step into the deep where the big catch is. And what Jesus is saying to Peter, if you're going to tell me that you've got faith, you've got to be prepared for risk because faith is risk. Isn't it? Because if we say we're walking by faith, and then the risk comes up and big things could happen and we back and say, no, this is the shallow water. I'd prefer to be there. This is safety. We don't get God's blessing. And so in the waters of life, there are many people who don't step out. And I found that when God called us out of teaching into Campus Crusade, because it was like the call of Abraham. I was going to leave family, the church, and everything else I had, go to a city where I hadn't been before and lived, and take on a ministry that I wasn't sure about with no money. And all of a sudden I found out that faith is not just talk, faith is risk. And when we come to churches, so often we say we've got great faith, but we're not prepared to risk anything. That's not what Jesus wants. He wants a congregation that trusts him, listen to him, and is prepared to risk no matter what the price is going to be. You know, when I was with Campus Crusade, they did the Jesus film. I don't know whether you've ever seen that, but in 1 year it went to 111 million people around the world. Little villages out on the sticks somewhere in the islands and whatever. With a backpack on with a little generator, they ran the film, and when they saw Jesus healing and all the rest of it, they said, can he do that for us? And they saw healings and all sorts of stuff. But when, the interesting part with Campus Crusade, it's almost like, we've got some good news for you and some bad news. What do you want first? And whether it's, I got good news, you can minister throughout the South Pacific. The problem is you're going to pay for it. And I lived in that sort of area for at least 10 years. And then Campus Crusade International says, we want to run a conference that's got to be on 5 continents. And we've got to hold back all our work that we're doing to run it on 5 continents because the donor for all of that said it's got to be 5 continents if you're going to run anything. So all the work around the world had to be done as extra to this particular deal. And so His Life America became His Life around the world, and it was an amazing success. But the issue was, we had to hold back on almost everything we're doing or do it as extra to something that came in as an edict that says, this is what God is leading our organisation to, be prepared to risk. And so this is the next principle. And many Christians barely get their feet wet because they're afraid of getting in above their heads. Jesus calls us to a life of faith or a life of risk, for it is in that life that real success comes. And many Christians are afraid to risk because they might be called a fanatic. Well, I want to tell you, you don't have to be a fanatic to follow Jesus. You just got to be obedient. And the reality is, you don't care what other people say. You do what God says. And this is the important principle. Listen to God's plan. Cooperate with His plan. And so Jesus is saying, hey, let me get into the boat of your life and let me direct both its path and its use. because that's where my blessing will be. Well, principle 3, admit when your best is not good enough. Be honest and realistic. In verse 5a, Simon answers when Jesus said, go out. And he says, Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything. He didn't fudge on it. He just said, I didn't come up to the mark. I went out fishing and it didn't happen. And you see, this is interesting because Peter was painfully honest. And there are so many people, I find it in counselling. So many people want to deny that they've got a problem. And I say, well, why have you come for counselling? If you've got a problem, let's know what it is. And instead of saying, I'm failing in my marriage, I'm failing in my business, I'm failing in my personal life, that's when you can start to get help, when you admit what is happening in your life. And I find so many people are afraid to admit it. So many churches are afraid to admit where they're really at. If they're on a slide, instead of saying, oh, yeah, we're right. No, we need help because we're not going anywhere. And the difficulty of, I just wrote in the notes on the side here. One of the things I use in counselling, that there are many, many solutions to a problem. But they're only a solution for you if you want to agree with it. And so we talk about issues, we plan out ideas, things that could be tried, and then I say to them, okay, now for the next week, what are you going to do? What are you going to actually do on the basis of what you've decided? And I look at it and I say, now we're in a room here, we've got a door, and we've got 2 windows, we've got 3 solutions. One of them's a door, one of them's that window, one's the other window. Now, are you prepared to go through that door? Oh, no, I don't like that one. You prepared to go through it? No, don't like that one. Prepare to go through that? No. I said, well, the issue is you've just told me you want to stay where you are. So we're finished. You see, the issue is in many cases people like to have a talk about their issues, but they're not prepared to do anything about it. It's because underneath they're not admitting where they're really at. And here, principle 3, admit when your best is not good enough. I can imagine Izzy in the rugby there. If you're not running fast enough, instead of saying, well, I'm running fast enough, they're just running faster. No, I'm not good at that, so I'm going to do more training, I'm going to do whatever, speed work, whatever's needed, because that's the only way that I can come up to the mark and be the player that's in the team. And same in life. These aren't rocket science. Einstein once said, doing the same things and expecting different outcomes is idiotic. We're a fool if we do the same things we've done before that failed and expect to have a success at the end. It doesn't happen that way. It only happens when we admit that it's not good enough and we're trying to find the way forward so that we can actually deliver what we would hope for. Principle number 4, put aside your pride and obey God's instructions. Respond to Jesus' lordship. And in Luke 5:5b it says, Peter says, after Jesus says, launch out on the deep, put down your nets, and Peter says, I've been fishing all night and it wasn't successful, but because you say so, God, you say so, Jesus, I will let down the nets. Isn't that interesting? Because at the end of the day, a foundational principle of Christianity is the lordship of Jesus. And if you call him Lord, what does Jesus say? Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and don't do the things that I say? He doesn't promise blessing on the lives of people who don't acknowledge him as Lord, which means we go for his direction. I'll give you an example how stupid people can be. I've had single Christians who are in good standing. They understand the faith and so on. They're in their early 30s or mid-30s. They haven't been able to find a partner in life, and so they decide that they're going to freewheel, if you like, and sexual or partners that they can find, they'll be engaged sexually with them. And they come in and say, life's not working particularly. And I say, what's the problem? Well, I'm single. And God's created me. He's created me sexually. That's good. But I don't have anyone to express that sexuality with. So I'm going to decide if I can find someone, I will do that, even if we're not married. Now you see, in counselling those people, I don't say, well, that's wrong. I say, your knowledge of the Bible, what would Jesus say to you if you were to ask him, is that okay that you go that particular way? What do you mean? He's not here. No. I'm asking the question, is Jesus Lord of your life? Oh, yeah. That's basis of faith. And you sort of say, well, okay, what would Jesus say if he's sitting here listening to your conversation where you've just given yourself license to do whatever you want to do sexually? What would he say? And it's amazing. You can go for 10 minutes on saying, no, not that. What would he say? What would he say? And finally, with a number of people, I say, are you saying that if I want to call Jesus Lord, I've got to do what he says in the Word? You got it. You got it. You are highly intelligent. After 10 minutes of that talk, you finally have understood it. That if you call him Lord, you do what he says. And this is what Peter did. You know, he put aside his pride. He didn't have this view any longer that I'm in charge of my life, because if you're going to have Jesus in your boat, he's got to be in charge of the boat. If you're going to have Jesus in your life, he's going to be in charge of your life. And as Peter says, but because you say so, Jesus, I will let down the nets. I will do what you tell me to do. It's that simple. And we make it very complicated because we give all, but all these things. But the issue is, at the end of the day, it's found in his word. And I know it's a big word, but it's not too hard to find the directions when you read it. So that's principles number 4. Number 5, and I'm not turning over 2 pages, I'm going to cover them all. Number 5, expect God to work in your life. Live expectantly. And in verse 6 of Luke 5, when they had done so, when they had obeyed Jesus, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. In other words, there was an abundance of God's blessing when they did as Jesus said. To rebound from failure, we must anticipate Jesus' promises in our lives. In this second fishing attempt, the disciples were acting on the expectation that obeying Jesus' direction, lowering the nets, that they would make a catch, when before they got nothing. The circumstances and logical conclusion that a catch of fish would be the outcome of obeying what Jesus said. Peter expected Jesus to deliver his promise of provision when obedience to Jesus' guidance was given. And since Peter at that point ceased to rely on his own fishing skills and experience, catching fish in the daytime was not a professional practice, he was not concerned with failure anymore because the deal was Jesus. Do you understand? When you hand it over to him, it's not your deal anymore. You play your part and let God play his. That's the way to go. It's the way we live. When God's presence is in our boat and God's plan is in our head and God's promises are in our heart, we can't fail. We can't fail. You know, I've found in life, in consulting with churches, if the church, if you really believe what God's saying, and if the church doesn't want it, that's fine. That's their deal. I haven't failed because I've done what Jesus wanted. At the end of the day, it could be a church that fails. I found in counselling, when I've listened, when I've taken God's word seriously, when I've given them all the instruction I can possibly give, and I've listened to their story and we've consulted and they've come up with a plan, if they don't obey it, it's not my problem. It's their failure, not mine. My job is to do what Jesus says and then hand it to people in consultation with them and let them decide what they're going to do. So that's principle number 5. Expect God to work. Principle number 6 is an interesting one. Share your experience with others. Luke 5:7. So they signaled to their partners in the other boat to come and help them, and they came and filled both boats so full they began to sink. You know, if Jesus is in your boat, he's going to perform some miracles if you're committed to him, because he's using your life as an example to others. And when he blesses you, you can say, come on over, see what God has done, which encourages people to say, I want that for my life. And so in this particular case, Jesus provides miraculous outcomes in our lives so we can share with others his goodness and provide incentive for them to come and seek him, even in the midst of our problems. And this was the case with the disciples. They experienced Jesus' amazing miracle of an abundant catch of fish. In fact, a catch too big to consume. They immediately signaled their partners in the other boat to come and share in the miracles, to have their needs met, and to proclaim the incredible blessing of being obedient to Christ. That's a powerful principle. And we can only imagine the ongoing stories. Imagine these guys sitting around as they get older, and a young person comes up and says to them, you know, you've been disciples of Jesus. Give us some truth. Oh, we want to tell you about this fishing expedition we had where we caught nothing, and Jesus says at the end of in the middle of the day, go and lower your nets, and that was just rubbish as far as we were concerned, but we did it, and we went out there, and I want to tell you, we learned something that day. When Jesus gives us a direction, we obey, and we expect some outcomes because we're obedient. Jesus blessed us. And you've got problems in your life, well, I tell you what, go through these principles, because if you adopt them, this is where God starts to work. Make sense? Okay, so let's go on to the next. We only got 2 to go. So if you're getting tired, lay down and relax. We've got 2 to go and we're nearly finished. Number 7, accept the reality of God's love and desire for your good. In other words, live in Jesus' presence, his power and his purpose. And if you read from verse 8, when Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees. This is after the miracle. And he says, go away from me, Lord. I am a sinful man. Because he looked at it and said, here's this holy man. He says to do this. Look what happened. I must be a sinful person because nothing's happening in my life. And he says, Jesus, go away from me. I'm a sinful man. For he and all his companions were astonished at the catch of fish they had taken, and so were James, John, sons of Zebedee, Simon's partners. In other words, that miracle for Peter consumed a whole lot of other people because they saw it and they wanted it. And then Jesus said to Simon, don't be afraid, Simon. From now on, you will fish for people. You may still fish for fish, but if you do it my way, your catch will be people. Enter the kingdom of God to experience what he has. So the catch was so great, the boats of the disciples began to sink. Overwhelmed by what had just happened, Peter fell to his knees, confessed his sinfulness. The other disciples, so overwhelmed, they saw and were engaged in this miracle. Seeing Jesus' awesome power to deliver totally unexpected outcomes made them aware of their limited and sinful lives compared to the supernatural life of Jesus. But notice Jesus' words, don't be afraid, from now on you'll fish for people. Jesus was saying to Peter, Peter, don't grovel on your failure. Don't look at that. In fact, I was listening to the ABC during the week. I was driving from somewhere, and they had, it wasn't the ABC, it was on 96.5. Music's better there, and it's got a better sound. But anyway, as I was driving along, they had this bit of a quiz, and it was a line taken from a film. And if you could identify which film it came from, you would win, I don't know, blooming fridge magnet or something. I don't know what it was, something pathetic. But anyway, the line was something like this, and I thought, this is pretty powerful. And I can't quote it exactly. I was trying to write it down, but I hadn't seen the movie or anything else. But it says, this person says to someone else, don't look back and get consumed with the past because it interferes too much with the now. Isn't that true? And when you look at failure, we can be morose on our failure. We can condemn ourselves over and over again. Our self-talk allows Satan to get in the door and condemn you even further. When we have failed in some way, admit it. Move in with Jesus. Let him give you direction, because you don't have to go back again and again. Romans 8:1 says, there is therefore now no condemnation in Christ Jesus, because the law of sin and death has given away to the law of the Spirit. Man, what a release. We don't have to go back and grovel about failure. And that's what Jesus says to Peter. Peter, stop carrying on there. Listen, mate, we're going to go from here forward. We're not going to try and take it from back there. We know you failed. You've admitted that. Let's forget about that now. But let's see what can happen when you follow me. I will make you fishers of men. I will use your life as a platform to reach other people. Your family, other people who've got problems. I will use your life, and you will feel that sense of reward and satisfaction about your life, because it's not focused on what you did as a particular industry or job. It's focused on who you are in God. That's where our identity comes from. That's where our belonging comes from. So, principle 7, last one, number 8. Commit to follow Jesus' guidance as a lifestyle. You know, you can learn this lesson and think, every time I've got a failure, I'll go back to these points. No, Jesus says, don't do that. Adopt this methodology for your whole life. Every day, every moment. And so read the passage, verse 11. So they pulled their boats up on shore and left everything to follow him. There it is. Their identity wasn't in fishing. Their identity now is in Jesus. So they follow him. And it might entail them still doing fishing. It might entail them doing anything else. But the fact is, now, that's not their identity. That's not their purpose. And you know, years ago when we were teaching evangelism, we said, if you have this thought, when you go shopping, if I say, where are you going? Shopping? No, you're not going shopping. You're going down to the supermarket to do whatever you can to profess Jesus Christ, by looking to help somebody, to try and talk to somebody, whatever it might be. And while you're there, do your shopping. You follow the difference? Anne's mother, my wife's mother, amazing lady. She won Salvation Army Woman of the Year award and so on. She was a counsellor, an artist and so on, and a poet. Amazing lady. Her whole life, from my understanding of her life, and I had a lot to do with her, but that's how she lived. You know, for her, she was on duty all the time, and never in an extreme sort of way. And finally, when she had three cancer operations, she had one lung that wasn't working, the other one she'd carry an oxygen bottle with her, and they finally said, you'll have to go into a home there to be looked after. Instead of saying, oh, a home, that's the last thing I want. She said, what a great opportunity. There's so many people there that don't know Jesus. And when she died, she had a photo on a door, which most of them did have, so they could identify who was the person behind the door in this home. The photo wasn't there. And as they were packing up all her goods, this guy from over the road said, I suppose you're looking for this photo. He showed the photo. He said, I knocked it off from the door there. And why? Because this woman was the most important person in my life. Why? She spent hours sitting and talking with me. He was a smoker and a drinker and a guy whose life was... But she spent time listening to him, talking to him, being Jesus to him. And awesome. You know, when you talk about Jesus using you, you don't have to be the evangelist with your Thompson chain reference stuffing it down people's throats. What you've got to be is a person who is enlivened by Jesus with the fruit of the Spirit, so that you can live that life for him, no matter what you do. And you see, when we talk about people being in ministry, we've got to forget about this professionalism and separate. We're all on ministry if we're believers and followers of Jesus. And the biggest area of ministry is out there in the workplace, at the school, shop for the tuck shop, for the person that neighbours next door. And I can remember the guy next door to our place whose daughter started cutting herself and doing all sorts of stuff. It was in year 12. And we often talked to him, and I'd gone running with him and so on. But he came past one day and he was out in the street and he had tears run down his face, and his daughter had just been taken to hospital. And Anne came past, and it was amazing because we're out in the street. She called me over, and we're out in the middle of the street praying for him. You don't have to do any big thing. You just got to be available with the lifestyle that follows Jesus. And that's the lesson of this story. Isn't it an incredible story? One little story with all of those principles in there. And you think about it and say, that's available to every one of us. Let's stop posturing or anything else, and let's say, I just want to be available for Jesus 24/7. And he doesn't ruin your fun. It's not like, a lot of people got this view, God's sitting up there, you having fun, cut it out. If you're a Christian, don't. The Christian faith is not a lot of don'ts. It's more to an open future to what we can do. And so we don't have to be this person of walking around looking like, some monk or something. We're just normal people empowered by Jesus supernaturally. We want to be normally supernatural. That our lives can be said, well, there's things happening in your life which don't make sense unless God be in it. That's what we're asking. That's what Jesus is asking. And so let's finish this off. Having been exposed to Jesus, having witnessed a level of success not previously experienced, the disciples instantly decided that this was what they wanted. They'd leave their old life of struggle to catch fish with less than ideal outcomes and follow Jesus to be fishermen for the kingdom of God. The big turning point in releasing real success in our lives comes when we appropriate Jesus' presence in our lives, cooperate with Jesus' plan, be realistic and honest about our lives with him, responding to willing obedience to Jesus' lordship, live expectantly, share our experience of success with others, and live in Jesus' presence, power and purpose, accept Jesus' guidance as our lifestyle. That's the pathway to success. The challenge is, can this work for each one of us? In sharing these insights, many will concede this all sounds great, but then claim it won't work in their circumstances. I hear responses like, I failed, I feel defeated, my problems are insurmountable, I'm experiencing hard times, I've lost hope. The antidote to this understandable but negative and defeatist outlook is to start reading the Bible, looking for the promises. Do you know there are 7,000 promises in the Bible for us today? Not cherry-picking verses that apply to someone else, but things that apply to the believer today. 7,000. And you ask people, and they can probably quote 5 or 6. And the point about it is, what is being said here, start reading the Bible. Do the things that in this story. Start claiming those promises before God, because he says, these promises are for you. And just because we haven't solved our problems doesn't mean there isn't a solution. Because through failure, we often learn lessons we'd never learn any other way. I love what Edison said. Don't you feel disappointed when 1,000 experiments failed in you trying to find the particular bulb that would work electrically? He said, no, 999 of them told me what I should never do again. And that one is the one that I've taken forward. And so this is the way Jesus teaches. And so there's many illustrations I give. We could talk about this for ages. But I'm pretty sure here, every one of you that is a believer and confessed believer, you can testify to the truth of this, even if you've been through rough times. So I want to pray a prayer. Then the band will come, or we can come back up while I'm praying the prayer. And we'll sing our last song. But I hope this is helpful for you, because these are messages for every day. And many people are struggling with some. And if you can't get to services, you can basically pick it up on streaming or on the website, and those messages will be available. Let me pray, and just listen to this prayer for a moment. Make it your own. It's contained in the notes there. Lord, help me let go of my fear of failure. I know Satan wants to use my fears to hold me back from living boldly for you. Forgive me for not living in faith. Help me from this moment on to live with bold confidence in you. Lord, help me not compare myself to others around me. I pray instead that I can keep my eyes on you and live a life that proclaims your excellence. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Bless you.